The Bible tells us in Philippians 2, it asks us a very serious question, a sobering question, especially for those of us that belong to Jesus Christ and are followers of his. It asks, are your hearts tender and compassionate? On the surface, we would say, yeah, I think my heart is tender and compassionate. I myself would think that my heart is tender and compassionate until I'm faced with a crossroad of a conviction that shows that maybe my heart isn't as tender and compassionate as I think it is. Maybe it's more me-focused instead of others-focused. The passages go on in verse 3. It says, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave, and he was born as a human being. And when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on the cross. We are faced with crossroads on a daily basis where we have to ask ourselves, is this me-focused or is this somebody else-focused? Do I have others' interests in mind, just as Christ Jesus had others' interests in mind, and he asked us to be the same way? Like I said, I thought my heart to be tender and compassionate until I was convicted with something a few days ago while I was reading this. I took my daughter out for lunch. We were going to hang out. We were going to have a blast. We were going to just have a daddy-daughter day. And I said, hey, Sloan, you can pick wherever you want to go. You pick. Whatever restaurant. It's your choice. And so she picks Tropical Smoothie Cafe. She's like, that place is great, Dad. We got to go there. And so I started thinking to myself, I just went there a couple days ago. Like, that's not all that. I'm like, I don't know if I want to go there. So I start to think and conjure up an idea of like, how can we manipulate her over to something else to go to a different place? And so I ask her, what do you want to get from there? And she's like, I want a quesadilla. I'm like, oh yeah, they got pretty good quesadillas. I'm like, but you know where they got better ones? They got better ones at the Mexican place next door. They got great Mexican food because that's what they're supposed to make, is Mexican food. What's Tropical Smoothie Cafe making Mexican food for? So I start to manipulate the situation. And while I'm doing this, I start to see her face change, and it starts to morph. And then I'm slapped with this immense amount of conviction. Is my heart being tender and compassionate? Am I showing, am I thinking of her interests, or am I thinking of only my interests in this moment? I was being selfish. I was being self-centered. And so we ended up going to Tropical Smoothie Cafe, which was great. But it makes me think of other areas of my life. What other areas am I being more self-centered instead of thinking and putting others' interests in? And is this a stumbling block of getting in the way of the gospel? Is it showing the love of Christ to other people? Because when Jesus laid up his ministry, we see at the crossroads the decisions that he had. He always chose others' interests above his own. Even when he had a desire to rest and take a break and just get away from the crowds that were mauling over him because he was practically famous. I mean, he's healing people. He's casting demons out of people. People wanted to press on Jesus. They wanted to be around him. And he at times, he's a human, just like you and me. We struggle with things. He wanted to get away from some of that at moments to just get some rest and get alone and maybe have a bite to eat with his disciples. And this shows us in Mark 6, in all four accounts it shows us of the Gospels. But in Mark 6, this is what happens. His disciples had just come back from preaching the gospel out to the Jews, and they're telling Jesus about what had happened and what had taken place. And Jesus is like, hey, let's go to a private place, let's get in the boat, and let's go and let's just get some rest and get some food and chill. So they get in the boat and they start casting away. Well, as they go away, the crowds, they recognize who he is. And they start getting everybody riled up, and they're marching down the shores while they're in this boat. Imagine this mass crowd. And they start pressing on Jesus. And Jesus, he could cast away to the other side of the lake, but he doesn't. He parks his boat and he gets out of his boat. And the Bible tells us in Mark 6, it says, Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped out from the boat, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Jesus was intentional. He always thought about the other people's interests above his own. And that's how we're supposed to act. He says that we're supposed to have the same interest in mind. We're supposed to be imitators of Jesus Christ. Are you doing that? The story later goes on, that same crowd. It's like the famous story of him feeding 5,000 people with the fish. We're talking a multitude of 20,000 people, because that was 5,000 men. That's not including the women and children. And he meets that need so he can teach. So as you're going through your daily life, while you're, whatever it is that you're doing, when you're going to school or on your sports, how you're treating your parents, is it all about you? Is it only you, or do you think about others as well? I think sometimes we can get so busy and so focused on what we're doing, and those aren't bad things, because Jesus was very busy too. But our sight just gets clouded out and we don't see people around us. We don't see people that are in need. Maybe the person that's at the lunch table by themselves, we don't see that person. Or maybe somebody that's struggling. I am guilty of this, where people have told me they're struggling and I'm like, yeah. And it's like you're just so laser focused on getting what you need to get done because I'm focused on my own thing. Or stopping for somebody that's on the side of the road. I don't want any of you to do that because it's dangerous. But in the past, I'm just too busy to stop for that person and help them. Or talk to that homeless person with the gospel because I'm just too busy. I'm in a hurry. I'm going to be late for my appointment. I think often we can get into a place like that, and it's dangerous, because if we belong to Jesus, remember, it says, are your hearts tender and compassionate? He says you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. The same attitude. Are your hearts tender and compassionate, or are you being self-centered? I want you to look at the questions. I want you to get real, and I can't wait to hear how it goes.